you have big shoes to fill. The giants came before you. They've written down the blueprint. They've handed it to you. It's up to you to pick it up, to soak it in, to read it, to cultivate it, to perfect it, to master it.
This episode of Choices Not Chances podcast is sponsored by Louisiana Gun Shop, located on Highway 90 West in Broussard, Louisiana, just south of Lafayette. For more information, stay tuned at the end of this episode. This is Choices Not Chances podcast with Ryan and Matt. I'm your co-host, Matthew Charette. Sit next to me is Ryan Rogers. Ryan.
Hey guys, welcome back to Choices Not Chances. We got a good one for you today. And just like every other episode, if you see something that strikes you that you need to get shared out, that needs to be shared with somebody that you know, we ask you just post that back up, tag the show, let us know where we're making changes and what changes we can make in your life. Today I got a good one. Back in, I think it was 2013, 2014 time frame, I had checked into a inpatient treatment facility in San Antonio, Texas, called Laurel Ridge, and they help with PTSD and TBI, psychiatric help from guys returning from the war. And they were amazing, but long story short there, I checked in. I met some new people. I met some guys from the Army. I met some gals from the Army and Navy, and is everybody just there trying to get better? I personally was there because I had my second baby on the way. My wife was, set to deliver him in I think 2.5 months from when I checked in, and we do that prolonged exposure therapy there, and I had never done that. I'd never tried to at that point, I never really even tried to figure out what my issue was or what was, what I was lacking or what I was needing. And so I checked in to get myself right before my second baby came along. And then, being anywhere for 30 days, closely confined with other people, you're going to learn about them. You're going to hear their stories, especially when you're in therapy together. And, not even not just the therapy that happens in the groups, but then the therapy that happens through music and through camaraderie and through, shared experience. Verbally just having a conversation with somebody else can be just as therapeutic as a trip to the shrink's office, in my opinion, in my experience. And so a lot of the therapy I got from Laurel Ridge came from the people that were there to get therapy with me, not from me or for me. And one of those people was Joshua Hearns. He joins us tonight. We're going to talk about his career. He came up in the Army as an officer, did times controlling tanks and seen and had different experiences in GWAT during Iraq campaign. And we're going to talk to him about his time in country, his time before country, his time in country, catalyst to service, and then we're going to move, through the interview, kind of catching up on where we left off. We'll get ourselves to Laurel Ridge, and then we'll transition to, lessons learned and things that he went through, experienced, and thrived through during his transition and getting back to a righteous spot. So, Josh Hearns, thanks for coming to the show, brother.
Right on, man. Glad to be here. Super glad.
Absolutely, man. Well, if you've seen any of my shows, you know where I'm going to go first. I'm going to go to childhood. I like to understand where people come from, to analyze where people come from and what experiences they had as a kid, growing up, what was in their lives, brothers, sisters, religion. I like to understand that small part. Not small part, I think it's maybe the biggest part, right? That 0 to 12 years old, where do we form what we want to be? And so let's get into it.
Man, that is loaded. That is really loaded. We'll take me back to therapy on this one because that's I think at age 43 and everything I've been through, I think that I can accredit most of who I am to my childhood, good, bad, or indifferent. Most of it bad and indifferent. But yeah, man, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. I come from a really old Southern family. I actually lived in the old plantation house that had been in my family since the 1800s on my dad's side, which they're riddled with problems, right? I'm actually estranged from all of them now. My dad died actually not long after I left Texas when you and I first met. And that was actually a very traumatic moment for me. And very life altering moment. Now on the other side is my mom's family, who they're all saints, right? Like my granddad on that side, he was a Marine in World War II in the Peleliu campaign, Peleliu, excuse me,
Peleliu, yeah.
Kane got out and had his own traumatic stuff that he went through, and his journey took him into ministry, and he became a Methodist minister after the World War II. And those are really good people. They're like angels. So I've got the angels on the mom's side and the devils on my dad's side. And my parents split when I was very young. My dad, a lot of substance abuse, very narcissistic guy, a lot of childhood trauma there that I've probably never told anybody about. So this is kind of a big moment to me to sit here and talk about this a little bit. But,
can you go deeper
trauma
into that? Was it like because of alcohol use, there was other things or abusive nature, or was it other things in general?
Oh, it was other things. I've kind of learned my grandmother was a little crazy. There was a lot of, my granddad was a really bad alcoholic as well. A lot of bad stuff there, to be honest. A lot to unpackage there, but it spilled over into my childhood. There were a lot of, my parents split when I was pretty young. I remember my dad kind of stalking us, kicking in some doors, abusing my mom a little bit until my stepdad came along. He was a Vietnam vet, right? And he was a doctor. He was a dentist. And had been in the Navy during Vietnam, and kind of put an end to all that, right? Like he kind of stood up and kind of became the protector, and then my stepfather / kind of father figure after that. But we moved up to Michigan and got away from all that. And so my childhood was kind of split between, like this Midwest Michigan childhood, and then coming down in the summers and Christmas in Georgia with that side of the family. So like I'm very fluid in dialects, and been around a little bit, but so yeah, there was kind of a rough childhood there for a little while. And it affected me growing up with grades and everything else, and just trying to fit in a little bit. Changed schools a lot, moved around a lot. And then it wasn't, I stabilized kind of in high school. I went to the same high school all 4 years. And that was when I kind of looked at the military as an escape my whole life. It was a way to, kind of get out there and escape the trauma that I had, and, see the world. And I just thought it was cool growing up. I was always the kid that played G.I. Joe and everything else. Yeah, that was kind of my childhood.
Yeah, and only child, or you had brothers and sisters?
I've got a sister. She was 16 months younger than me. Yeah,
Okay.
so we were kind of close growing up. She was always a great behind me, and kind of my partner in crime, so to speak.
Good. And so, coming from that environment, you joined the Army. What is the catalyst to the service there? Is the catalyst, let's just get the hell out of here and go see different things, or?
So in high school, yeah, right? Like I just wanted to get away. I wanted to join the Marine Corps. So here's my funny, I almost joined the Marines story, right? Yes. Everybody's got that almost joined, right? So I could tell it because I went on and I became an Army officer, right? So I'm not that guy. Well, I almost did something, but even though I almost became a Marine, so it was spring break my junior year in high school. I'm like, I'm gonna join the Marine Corps. My mom's like, what are you doing? Don't do that. Finish high school, first of all. Go to college. Like, you can always go in afterwards, right? She's just being a normal mom, right? And so I had an aunt. She invited me out to Washington. I had an uncle that he had commissioned through ROTC back in the day. And so he kind of talked to me, took me to some ROTC unit out there. And I think somewhere, I can't even remember, the University in Washington. And anyways, I came back. And we were getting ready to sign. So the recruiter and his buddy came over. They were in their dress uniforms. We were going to do it at my grandmother's house, right? The signing and the ceremony. And right before we did it, my mom stopped. She's like, will you please come in the back room and talk to me for a second? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Right. So he begs me not to do this. She's like, please just go to college. You can always go in after you graduate. Just graduate high school. You still got a whole year to go. You don't even know if you want to be a Marine next year. And so I went back, I told the recruiter, I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's put this on hold for a minute, right? So he's like, well, can I talk to you for a second? So I go back in the bathroom with him, and he lights me up. He's like, you're not going to back out. Are you scared? Are you, he's just like going in trying to get my pride. He's like, we got all dressed up. I got my buddy over here wearing these uniforms. You're gonna go in there and you're gonna sign this piece of paper. And I just was like, nah, man, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm all
He
set.
was so mad. Oh my God, he was mad. Him and his buddy left. I never talked to him again. So, anyways, I went on, like I kind of became a hippie, so to speak,
Yeah.
right, in my senior year. I started going to concerts and started kind of coming of age a little bit, right? Because I
Yeah.
guess, moving around, I never had a friend group. And finally in high school, I stabilized a little bit. And it took a while to grow, right? We all grow in high school. And I finally started coming out of my shell a little bit, started partying, and I ended up going to college, joined a fraternity. I was Mr. Man on the campus, just having a good time. Had long hair, long beard. I was following jam bands around. I've been to like almost 100 Widespread Panic shows, And then, 9/11 happened, right? And I just remember sitting here and I'm like, it's go time, right? Like I always wanted to be in the military. My grandfather, who was a role model of mine on my mom's side, the Marine, he had joined the Marine Corps following Pearl Harbor.
Hmm.
Like, well, this is my generational time to do that, right? So I shaved my beard, my long hair off, and I went out and I started talking to the Army. I went to the Army recruiter. He's like, dude, you're going to drop out of college. We're going to send you to basic training. You're going to go in. You're going to be a private. You're going to go fight. And I'm like, yeah, man, cool, dude. That's what I was kind of thinking about doing, And then I went and talked to the ROTC guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's like, screw that guy. He's an idiot. Come join ROTC. We'll send you to basic training this summer. You'll come back. You'll be a cadet. We'll give you a scholarship, pay. You'll go in, here in 2 years, you'll be an officer. You'll be a leader. And I'm like, well, that's a much better deal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I took that route.
Check. And so, how'd your mom feel? Was she just feeling better about you being an officer and at least getting your degree and things like that before going in?
Yeah, she knew it was always going to happen, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and that
yeah.
was the weird thing because once I had kind of backed out of the Marine Corps and gone into like this college frat boy mode, right? Like I'd stopped thinking about the military so much. And then when 9/11 happened, I just went out and joined.
Yeah, it called to you, huh?
Everybody was just like, yeah, we figured you would.
Yeah.
Everybody was surprised. And that was the craziest thing. Like, even in my 20-year high school reunion, I went back and people I hadn't seen since high school were like, yeah, we always figured you'd join. I'm like, oh, okay.
That was just your that was your archetype.
Yeah.
From the beginning, you
That's
can
who I
kind of see
was.
that. Yeah. Now, what was your father's side think about you going in and serving?
They didn't want me to.
Okay.
Yeah, they were a little bit different. My grandfather on that side, who was a good guy, right? Like he had some problems, some alcohol problems, but he had served in the Air Force during what was the Army Air Corps back then, in the Korean War times. Was it still the Army Air Corps or was it the Air Force back then?
I don't know.
Don't let me get my facts
right
mixed up.
in between. Yeah. I'm not. Don't call me a liar. Can you look that up?
I'm looking it up.
Yeah,
Check it out.
I want to say the Air Force. I'm pretty sure it was the Air Force.
too.
Yeah, kind of a mute point, but he was in for a little bit during that point. But that was kind of the only service. And then my dad, who again grew up on all this land on this old plantation, he loved to play Army, right? Like he loved to have all his guns and everything, and wanted to talk about all, but he never joined, and he wasn't necessarily excited about me doing it either, right? But I guess that's right. You don't want to see your kid go off to combat, but
Yeah, I mean,
there was a time where he was really not
1947.
about it.
1947 changed.
Okay, so it would have been the Air Force then.
Air Force then, yeah. Yeah, I hear you on that. And like, I have a boy now, and everything I do is still war fighting from the books that I write to my platform. And there, it's going to be, I'm going to have to atone for that. He's raised by my friends, and a lot of them are war heroes that are over here all the time. I mean, decorated dudes. And so like, I'm just trying to make it right in my mind at this point right now that, hey, this may come. So I'm classically conditioning him to want to be an officer, have his degree. And like your dad and all your uncles did the enlisted thing. You ain't doing the enlisted thing. So you go be a PC. That's fine with me. But maybe not. I also tell him, if you want to build video games for the rest of your life, there's ways to make money doing that too. So you do what you want to do. You don't have to follow me. But I just see that. I see that in him. So His mom sees it too. She flips out.
Same with my son, right? Like he's 11 now, and he's asking me a lot of questions about military stuff. He'll come in here and look at this wall every
Oh
once in a
yeah.
while. And at one point, about a year ago, I looked at him and I was like, son, I want you to know that there's no obligation or expectation for you to go in the military, right? Like I
Yeah.
know I did, there's some, long line of military in my family, short of my dad. And I was like, so what?
Yep.
You don't
Yep.
have to, if you do, you do, right? And like you said, right? Like if I like to think that with my experience and what I learned, I want to pass that down to my kids, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, like, hey, go in, get the higher paying job,
Mm-hmm.
fill some need, like you've got to like go get shot at to prove you're a man or anything because
Right.
you don't Air Force, like be a cook or something. Like I don't care. Like
Or
just
fly a jet, fly a helicopter, do something different than what I did.
yeah, right.
Let me
Yeah.
live vicariously through you as a pilot. But yeah, the whole trudging through the mud on your feet it's fun. Don't get me wrong, I had a great time, but you got to really want that.
Yeah.
And be committed, and then the other side of it as a parent, and I do my best to stay apolitical on this show. I'm not trying to bait you into a conversation you don't want to have, but as a parent, I look at this place and I'm watching the entire world in chaos, and a government who I don't know if they respect a warfighter enough to even give them my blessing to say you could take my son and put him to work, like I used to. I used to believe, and now things are crazy, and it's not like it's not even maybe it's attached to politics, but it's not even political. It's all over the entire world. The entire world is in chaos, and I at least want to know that you are going to support and resource my child enough to fight the war for you, and it's just crazy. So moving on. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying, bro. I totally agree with everything you just said.
Yeah, it's just wild. So moving on from there, 9/11 strikes a catalyst in you. Everybody knows you're going to go in. Finally, the reserve officer training recruiter hooks you up and says, "This is what's up." So is that what you do? Do you go off to boot camp and then come back, finish the degree?
Did, yeah. So starting that second semester of that year, which would have been around, Christmas, the first of '02, right? Like I started ROTC classes. And then that summer, I went to their version of basic training at Fort Knox, graduated top of my class, and actually got an airborne slot. So I went straight from Fort Knox down to Fort Benning. I wasn't even in the Army, right? This is kind of another funny story, right? I went to airborne school. I went back to my college, right? And he's like, oh, you got top of the class, everything else. He's like, what do you want? I'm like, I want to go to airborne school. So he calls at the local National Guard unit. They had a slot. He gets the slot and sends me. I didn't even have an ID card.
You weren't even
Right?
insured.
Like, I was just an ROTC cadet that wasn't even under contract with ROTC. So they print me out some orders, and I had to keep the orders in my pocket the whole time. And I go down to the airborne school, like I barely had just learned how to march, and I'm down there jumping out of planes. I think everybody thought I was a spook, right? Because this was like summer of we had most of the cadre had just come back from Afghanistan. They were all like Ranger guys that had jumped in and then came over to be instructors over at the airborne school. And you had a bunch of civilians that were there as well,
Yeah.
It was really kind of a weird time, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, once I did that, I came back, and then I contracted with ROTC for the first, the fall semester of '02, and then went in from there, did 2 years.
Check. And so what'd you come in as when you did come in, when you commissioned?
Second lieutenant.
No, I meant job wise, occupation wise.
Oh, 19 Alpha armor officer.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so my first job was a tank platoon leader. I was a tank platoon leader with the 1st Infantry Division out of Schweinfurt, Germany. 1st Battalion, 77th Armor.
1st Battalion, 77th Armor. That's dope.
77.
Can you go into like I want to know like your emotions, sensations, feelings coming into the new unit, checking in and knowing that now you're in charge of these guys and this equipment, because a lot of times like heavy is the head, right? That can be overwhelming on your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, no matter how many times you do it, it can be overwhelming.
I tell you what, and you're right? Like I'm 43 now. I'm a corporate manager. Like I run a big territory. I do all kinds of hiring and disciplinary stuff. Like, I mean, I think back to when I was, shoot, how old was I then? 25, right? Fresh out of school. I just shaved my beard and hair off, to join the Army. And so, and they prep you for that, right? Like, going in as an officer, ROTC is trained to make you basically a squad leader, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
all you train, squad tactics and how to be a leader. And that's all anybody talks to you about. It's like, hey, you're about to go stand in front of grown men, particularly a platoon sergeant and some staff sergeants who have been there for a while and know what they're talking about. And you're going to have to be their boss, right? And it's not
Yeah.
only going to have to be proficient technically in what you're doing in your craft, but you've got to be strong enough as a human being to stand in front of these, it was just all men back then, and tell them what to do without being
Yeah.
intimidated, right? Because some
Yeah.
of them are intimidating, that, and they
Yeah.
love to give the lieutenant crap all the time, right? And so, I mean, it's super scary, right? Like you've got 2 years in ROTC, like training for this, and I'm like, all right, good. I keep graduating, I keep getting top knocks, and everything, so I feel like I'm good. I got my first choice of duty station, which was Germany. I got my first choice of branch, which was armor. I'm like, man, I'm kicking butt here, and then I graduated college in the summer of '04, and I went to Fort Knox again for what was called Armor Officer Basic course back
Mm-hmm.
then. I think it's still called BOLIC now. But yeah, it was all just lieutenants that were armor and cavalry. And again, that's where you're really learning how to be a platoon leader for the first time. And it's the same kind of talk, like all the sergeants first class that are there and staff sergeants that are, part of the cadre training you are telling you the same thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
better know what you're talking about when you stand up in front of these guys because you're about to send them, into combat, right? Because we were in combat, at the time. I mean, by that time, that was '04, we were
Yeah.
already in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? So you knew you were going into the den, the lion's den at that point. And so, yeah, I went overseas. I had about, say, I got there Valentine's Day of '05, and I think it was about 6 or 7 months that I was on like HHC as a little staff officer, just waiting my turn to come up before I could go take my platoon.
Mm-hmm.
Just the excitement, the anticipation of it. And finally you go down there and you're standing in front of these guys and you're like the leader, and look, man, that was like 20 years ago now, right? Like I want to sit here and say, oh, I felt confident and strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I told them all to do, and they all respected and loved me and all that, like I'm sure like it was nerve wracking, right?
Yeah.
Like, I got very lucky though, and like most of us do, right? Because the Army and the military, the Marine Corps are really full of great people, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
there's
Microcosm of the greatest people in the nation.
absolutely, you get your occasional jerk in there and all that, but I mean, at least they're disciplined too. So now I had great human beings, great just war fighters, in my platoon back then. I had a great platoon sergeant. He had just PCS there from another unit, and him and I were a good team, and led
Yeah.
those guys through the train up to go to Iraq. And then I went through that whole train up, and then right before we deployed, I moved up to be an XO in another company. So got them all ready to go, and then they switched it up.
Yeah, but I mean, at least they're ready to go for whoever takes them over, and that's what's beautiful about the way our organizations work is that's what it is. You make it, leave it better than what you found it because it's still people's flesh on the line if you look at it that way. So, and that's the way it should be looked at. So I want to segue. I want to detract from our chronological order or not maybe, but before we go forward and get into Iraq and some of the XO time, when did music become a part of your life? I was guessing it as a child, but was it college?
Always.
Always.
I've always. Can y'all hear that beeping by chance?
I hear nothing.
Sorry. All right, that's my computer then. It's like super loud in my hearing. Sorry.
No worries.
Man, I've always just been a music guy, right? Like I've just loved music. I just always like I was a big Guns N' Roses fan as like a middle schooler, and so I begged her for years to get me guitar lessons, and finally she did, like my junior year of high school, right? And it just took the guy. He taught me like 3 chords, and I'm like, oh, that's easy, right? And so I started picking it up, and I taught myself how to play, and then I went on to college. And you got a lot of time sitting in college, sitting around dorm rooms your first couple of
Mm-hmm.
years, frat houses and all that. And so I started playing more and more and more. And I got like really sharp at it. So I go through these waves with music, right? Where I'll play and I get really good. And I'll learn some new songs and I'm just rocking out. And then I'll set them down for like 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. So have those been down for 2 years? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've really played.
I was going to tell you to pick one up and riff one off, but if it's been 2 years,
Man,
I won't put you on the spot.
you just have to go look at my YouTube where I played some really good a few years ago and recorded them for eternity.
Yeah, I'll bring it in. No, that's awesome. That's one of the things when we were in Laurel Ridge, man. That's one of the parts of the day I look forward to, is just going in there and jamming. You know, there's something about music. It's medicinal. It's like waves or jungle birds. I don't know. It does something. The frequency. I don't know. There's something about it though. Music moves people. So
It's always been therapeutic for me as well, man. It really has. It just, like you said, man, it moves you. It gets in me. And then particularly like at Laurel Ridge, right? It was super therapeutic. It gave me something to do with my mind and my hands and some flow and some purpose. And I think it's always kind of been like that. And I found like if I get really stressed or, I got a lot of going on, or man, I'm in my head, right? I know I can sit down and grab that guitar and just start strumming some chords and it'll wash away, even if just for 10 minutes, right? Right.
Yeah, I love it. So music from a young age. Okay, we'll go back. I just had to know that. I knew that it was at some point before I met you, and I didn't know when that point was. So right on.
I think Laurel Ridge was one of those 2 year marks, right? Where I was like, oh man, it's been 2 years since I played guitar. And I got the therapist there. She got her boyfriend.
That's right.
Actually plays the guitar.
Yeah.
And I sat there and picked that. I remember picking those songs with you. That was a lot of fun, man.
That was great, dude. Great times, great memories. Even in a situation where you wouldn't expect that you would go and meet, friends that you're going to talk to 10, 15 years later and reminisce. So, good times there. All right. Take me to, actually, before we move on to XO time, I want to dive more into the workup with your guys. Like there's platoon commanders and new guys coming into the Army all the time. This video is going to be out there forever, or, arguably forever. What would give me your three to five, of your biggest learning points and lessons from being a platoon leader in the Army in the armored tank unit.
Oh man, you're gonna ask me trick questions. I knew I should have write stuff down.
Just give me some of the finer points or the learning points that you wish you would have known or somebody would have told you about being a leader in the Army. Let's plan it out like that.
Well, I feel like all the training did a really good job of preparing me, to be honest, right? Like I don't think there were really any surprises. I think the one way that the Army kind of fell a little bit short was all the administrative stuff, right? Like you spend so much time, how to conduct small unit maneuver, fire and maneuver, right? You learn how to, particularly going into being an officer, right? Like, ROTC is solely trained on making you like a proficient squad leader, infantry squad leader, right? And that's how they grade you and, base everything. That's the foundation of learning. Same for a Bullock, right? You go in there, you learn how to shoot tanks, you learn how to maneuver tanks, you learn how to, command and control, fire control maneuver or measures and all that stuff. But you don't really learn the administrative part, which takes up 90% of your time, right? Yeah. Like it's super cool to go out there and shoot guns and maneuver and lead and tell people to put the fires on targets, right? What's not cool is like, what's the government travel system? What's that called? I can't even remember the name of it anymore. It's for
GSA.
Something like that. That you don't learn that stuff. You're like, it takes up 10 minutes just to figure out, like how to put in certain requests. You don't learn, the hours that's spent, doing Article 15s and investigation, stuff like that, which that stuff was actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. They did a little bit of training on that, but you get what I'm saying. Some of the administrative tasks that just take forever, maintenance and how to record all of it and prep all of it. And those parts weren't necessarily fun. Like for a young leader, I mean, you got to just show up, and you got to be a leader. And I think one thing that I have learned, even that I'm still learning, to be fair, that I'm still learning, is that selfless service. And I think, I'm kind of hard on myself a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. I think, I certainly remember every mistake I made. I beat myself up for it. But I think a lot where times where I really fell short of my own expectations is where maybe I was a little selfish. I mean, we can all be selfish. We're human. I'm human. And I've really learned, especially as of late, what that selfless service looks like, to where to be of true service, right? To true service to somebody or an organization, to where, I think there were times where I thought a little bit more about myself, maybe held back because I didn't want to get my feet too dirty, or I didn't want to expose myself too much or something like that. And it just, probably some mistakes I made in that realm. And I think as I'm learning now, just how to be of service to the community and to everybody else. And back then, as a soldier, just making sure that you're fully dedicated to your unit, that you're out there. It's all about them. And if you make it all about them, 100% about them, they'll give it back to you.
Yeah.
Give it back to you, and you'll be safe.
Yeah.
You'll have everything. You give it all away and you'll get it all right back.
That's right.
I think there was times when if I held 10% back, that was my mistake. I never got that back from the guys at times. And I can't really give a good example on that, but just kind of off the top of my head, and some of the lessons I've learned as I've got older and that's important. And, the military instills that in you, especially as leaders, right? And it's that, as an officer, right? For example, letting your guys eat before you eat, right? And hey, if you don't have anything left when it's all done, guess what? You're eating an MRE, but that's all right. Your guys see that, they see that, and they respect that, and they'll give it back to you, especially when it counts.
Yeah, totally agree. We have a saying in the Marine Corps, we get fitness reports to determine, how fit we are to continue being a leader. And that's the grading system in which we go against our peers to go up. And, one of the perfect or beautiful things that I always heard in the Marine Corps from good leaders was that your Marines will write your fit rep. You don't have to worry about your fit rep. You stay committed and do what you're supposed to do for them. They'll write your fit rep all over. Your squad will excel. Your platoon will excel. And when your platoon's excelling, people are seeing, hey, they know what they're doing down there. And then when your guys get asked about you and your name is revered from them, not because you wear a rank and you yell real loud, but because you had their back. And that is, you can't bottle that up and sell it. That's leadership. That's true leadership. And let your people write your fit rep. And honestly, that transfers to any organization on the planet, business, anywhere you go. If you care about your team, you make sure you resource your team, support your team, mentor and guide your team. Your team will put out, and they won't put out because they have to. They'll put out because they want to, and that's the goal in any team setting. So, as a leader,
and I found in corporate America, you can really win if you apply that, because they do not instill that in corporate America at all. It is very self-centered. It is very about you. It's very cutthroat. And I've learned, so when I got out of the Army, I worked in the railroad as a railroad manager. They picked me up right away, and I stayed with them for a couple of years till they went through a hospital takeover. And it was just kind of weird, long hours, very hostile work environment. So I got picked up by the company I'm currently at now, and that's why I left them. But, especially working around union guys, going in there as a manager on the railroad where you have, you're pitted against the union all the time. But if you go in there and show those guys that you're on their side, I mean, it's a little, you got to balance that union stuff a little bit too. Even now as a corporate, as a regional manager in a home improvement sales organization, I build teams all over the country, and, I have peers that just are very selfish about themselves, and they'll go into, offices and just not really build teams or not really give service. And it comes back on them, and I feel like sometimes I excel by actually, being part of that team and giving to everybody, and just showing that I'm there for them. And I tell all my teams that I'm like, look, I might be the boss, but I work for you. If you fail, I fail. I'm here to give you the resources that you need to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the motto I live by.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and that's the way it should be. And you've hit on it several times, so I'm not going to beat it to death. But that selfless acts and selfless service, when you give fully and you commit fully to where it's like I'm not worried about what somebody's giving me back for this. This is the right thing. This is going to help growth. This is going to help the company. And you give it, like you said, dude. It just comes back. It comes back. All right, so we kind of jumped forward to the railroad there. I do want to get into some of your XO time, though, and talk about that Iraq deployment a bit. So, just to get back on track, you've come in, Germany, work up, got the guys worked up, and then boom, you're going to take over an XO position before you guys push.
Yeah, we went to Iraq. I actually took over being the XO of Alpha Company 177 Armor in Kuwait at Camp Buring. Moved over there with those guys. And, at the time it was hard because the platoon I was with, they went with another task force. They were with Task Force 126 Infantry. That which was the same unit McGinnis was in. That got the Medal of Honor, actually. And so they went up to Baghdad with them a little early, and I had to stay in Kuwait with the rest of the main body of, my home battalion there. And so I was a little upset about that at first, right? And that was just kind of looking back at it right now. But then I went over to Alpha 177 to be an XO, another great group of human beings, that I'm, and I'm super glad about that now because I would have never met all these guys.
Sure.
I'm still great for and yeah, I was with them just long enough to kind of meet a few of the personalities before we pushed north into Iraq. I think we was 19 October 2006 is when we flew into Bob Falcon Baghdad with that unit there. And so we were a tank company, but we were an old legacy brigade. And so the Army task organizes, and with these legacy brigades, basically, we kept a tank platoon. We gave 2 platoons away. And then, first of all, let me back up. We detached as a company and went over with 118 Infantry. So I was with Task Force 118 Infantry. We gave up 2 tank platoons to them, and they gave us 2 infantry platoons in return. And so we were a mech infantry team out of Fob Falcon. Our first job there, we had OP San Juan, which was it was a hunting lodge for Saddam Hussein. It was south of airport, and it had like this it was about 3-story tower, and like this, I can't remember how many cars, like 20-car garage, and it was a launch that he had where he'd bring dignitaries up, and they'd go to the top of the tower. They would release animals and shoot them in this big field. Anyways, we took it over. Excuse me, the Army did, and we went in there and used it as to surface-to-air missiles to kind of guard the southern flank of Bayab there. So that was our first mission. It was actually pretty quiet there for the most part. And then as the sectarian violence kicked off and the surge was coming into play, we went out and built a combat outpost in the city at that point. Capt Norris.
Capt Norris. Gotcha. And so what's that look like? What's that day-to-day look like?
Man, so yeah, it was a lot of patrolling. It was weird at first. At first, we didn't think we were going to deploy, right? So I almost thought I wasn't even going to get to go to Iraq because we were all set to go in like June of 2006. And we were getting ready, and then this was when the war was ending. Remember, Bush landed on the aircraft carrier and like, it's over and we're going to draw down. And so they delayed our deployment indefinitely. And so we're like, well, what do we do with our hands? We're training, And so our brigade commander was like, well, let's go back training. So we put all of our tanks and all of our equipment on rails and shipped it all to Grafenwehr to start training again, because it was that time. If we're not going to Iraq, it's time to do gunnery. So we get there, and I think it was like a week into it. They're like, whoop, never mind, you're going, right? Because that was when all the violence was kicking off. And they're like, ooh, maybe the war is not over. So like we put all of our stuff back on trains, get it back to Schweinfurt. The platoon that I was a platoon leader with ended up going and leaving straight from there, going to Kuwait by themselves. With 126 Infantry. I was stuck back with like for a week or two with my parent battalion, this is right when the change went on. and then went to Kuwait, and then fell in. That was where I fell in on Alpha 177. But yeah, so it was like we thought we weren't going to go. Then it was like all of a sudden, go now, right? Sectarian violence is kicking off. So when we got to Iraq, it wasn't overly exciting at the moment, right? Like things in Ramadi had been kind of stirred up, but they were just at the point, I think, where they were kind of quieting down a little bit over there. My parent battalion went to Ramadi. They were over there, 177. I know they worked a lot with the Marines. And then, I was with Alpha 177, and we went with 118 Infantry. And we were just kind of conducting patrols. We had about 3 platoons at the time. And it was just really like this 8-hour patrol cycle, right? Just wasn't a lot of action at the time. I remember like the first contact we really came in, short of some IEDs, right? But as a company, right, I remember some dude stepped out behind one of our tanks. It was like the platoon sergeant's tank, and like dumped an AK mag at it, right? It hurt. Like maybe chipped some of the cart paint or something on it. But it was like, oh, that's like the first action like we really kind of had, and it slowly started picking up a little bit, right? As we started getting kind of towards the surge. At first, it was a lot of just patrols, right? And then as it started getting a little bit more violent, as a battalion, we had about 1/5 of Baghdad, right? We had like almost all of West Rashid when we got there. It was this huge footprint, for a battalion, right? It was crazy. When the surge hit, they put an entire brigade in that area. Right. So it was a lot more combat power there by the time the surge hit. And thank goodness, right? Because you had the spring offensive, which was really the height of the Iraq War. There was no way we would have been able to control that area.
Not with a battalion. Things are starting to heat back up. And can you dive into that a little bit, why they're heating back up?
Yeah, that was around, late 06, early 07. You had the spring offensive of 07, but that was really where Petraeus came in, and we were, his whole idea was the whole coin, right? Like it was get out there, get off the fobs, get into the city, start interacting with the populace. Mm-hmm. Like we're never going to win if we just sit on these big fobs and conduct combat patrols, right? Like, and so that was around the time we shut down our OP San Juan there at BIOP and went and started opening up Fob Falcon, which was about the time I went on R&R. I went back to Germany, and that was when I proposed to my wife. I spent my R&R over there, and things were really kind of picking up. Like the week before I went on R&R was probably my first big firefight that I was in, right? I was in a couple little skirmishes, saw some firefight. I was kind of in some little fights, but it was a big one where I had a big role in it. It's actually a video on YouTube of me like running over a car I'd shot up and stuff that I found later on. But
well, can you talk about that for a little bit? Can you talk about that for a little bit? How that came to be, or like we'll get to the R&R.
Yeah.
But so what was that? What was the mission and such?
The mission really was just to go up to this police station with the commander and talk to some Iraqi National Police. That was it, right? So we had this ad hoc crew. He was in a gun truck, and he had his headquarters guys in there. We had another gun truck. At that time, we had the mortar platoon attached to us, and they weren't shooting mortars, right? So they were just motorized infantry, basically. And then I had my tank, and I was only running a 3-man crew. I was just kind of there just to have some armor to ride around and escort the commander around. So he's in the police station. We're on the north end of our territory, which was probably just a little bit south of Route Irish there, kind of between the Green Zone and BIOP. I could probably look up. I know exactly on a map where the police station is, but I can't think off the top of my head how to pronounce it. But anyways, I get they call me. They're like, hey, we're watching these guys shoot mortars up on a BIOP right now. You're the only show in town. You got to go. We got helicopters coming on station right now to engage them, and you're going to go in. And I'm like, oh my God, right? So I get out, I dismount, I run in there, I find my commander. I'm like, we got to go now, right? So as I'm remounting my tank, I see the choppers up there. I've got my headset on. I'm getting ready to get back in, and they're like, hey, we're engaging. And I watch them, hit them with their little 30 mic,
yeah.
And kind of like really cool, right? So we go, and I'm leading. and they're walking me on, and we come out into like this big giant courtyard over there, and around some buildings and everything. And it was they had engaged a group. Let me fix my mic here. They had engaged a group that were shooting mortars out of the back of some cars. And you know how those 30 mics are, right? There was some collateral damage. So my first thing, I remember coming through that gateway and that open area, and this old man in a white garb, right, came running up to my tank carrying a small female child, right? And he was just covered in blood and blood running all down her. She had been hit by shrapnel off the exploding rounds from the Apache. And I was like, one of the first kind of things I had seen like that, right? And what do you do, right? You don't do anything. I'm in a tank. I'm roll right past them, right? I'm moving to contact because I can see the car that they engaged, about 100 meters in front of me, smoking, with some dudes kind of laying around it. And so I move on to it. And then, the commander and his truck come up. At that point, I kind of pull into an overwatch position because, again, I'm in a 3-man crew tank at that point. So I'm overwatching them. And then as that's going on, they're getting a report that another car from the scene is trying to leave. And they want us to chase. I'm like, who's us? I got 2 gun trucks. Everybody's dismounted, pulling bodies out of this car over there. I'm sitting here in a tank. Crowds are gathering, like a bunch of military age males are gathering, right? Because they're all their buddies that are sitting there now, like in shock. And so he's walking me, and I start chasing this car. I got some pictures of it too. This is the one that's on YouTube. And I'm like 3 blocks in the middle of a city. In the neighborhood is called Jihad, right? And I'm in like a tanker's nightmare. I'm on a 1-lane alley, in this 3-story buildings, a 3-man crew. I'm starting shutting hatches because I don't want people to throw grenades down in me. And like, I see this car and like the Apache, like we're playing tag with it. And finally I come around this turn. It's like this T-bone intersection. It's 1-lane roads. They're all alleys, right? And I see the car, the dudes bail, right as I come around the corner, right? So I'm like, I'm going to engage it and just disable it, right? So I go to fire my 50, 1 round fire, and it like jammed. I'm like, stop it. You hit it with the coax. The gunner goes to fire, boom, 1 round, it jams. I'm like, oh man, I get 1 round off. He gets 1 round off. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? I'm like, and finally I get a good burst through my 50, right? I'm shooting through the trunk of it, right?
Yeah.
Shooting it. And I'm like, all right, I think it's disabled now. I'm like, and then they're like, hey, somebody needs to go check it and see what's in it. And I'm like, who's they? Like, I got a 3-man tank crew. I'm 3 blocks from my nearest support, which can't support me if they had to, right? There's no other patrol around, which is why you had me here. Like, what do you want me to do? So I'm finally like, all right, I tell my gunner, I'm like, hey, buddy, you're up. Go put your M4. Walk over here to this car and see what's in it, right? And so he goes over there, right? And I'm covering him at this time, right? And I remember like some dude is like low crawling above me. Like, I don't know what he's trying to do, right? So I just shoot at the guy, right? I don't know if I hit him. I don't know what happens. I shoot at him. I never see him again, right? I'm like, we got to get out of here. He goes and he can't get it open. I'm like, just shoot the lock off, whatever. We done shot the car. So he backs up and he shoots 1 round and his M4 jams. And I'm like, does no weapon on this tank work?
Oh my
I'm like,
God.
what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so he looks in, he's like, oh, the keys are in it. He goes and opens up the trunk. There's 50 82 millimeter mortar rounds in there, about 10,000 rounds of 7.62 by 54R linked, and about 4 tubes of RPG propellant in there. And you can see where my 50 cal API rounds were skimming over the top of this cache of mortars in the trunk of this car.
Oh my God, dude.
I'm like, there is a God, and he jammed all our weapons.
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
It's just wild, man. And so we sat there in an overwatch position for I don't know, it felt like forever until this infantry platoon finally gets on site. And they're like, hey, what building did those guys run in? And so this was like my John Wayne moment. I got my full green pickle suit on, my Army tanker helmet, and I've got my M9, and I jump out and I'm running down the street, and I'm banging on, they're in here. And the infantry kicks the door in and goes in. And we never did find the guys, but God, the action kept going. I go back down. So here's another part. Another tank platoon comes on site, and they're like, "Hey, all the cars in that parking lot were part of it." They're like, "We need to destroy them." All right.
Yes.
So they're in Overwatch. This engineer platoon comes in and they start taking thermite grenades and they start thermiting the cars.
Mm-hmm.
They come across the radio like, "Hey, we're out of thermite grenades." And then you hear the Apache guy. They're like, "Hey, bro, that's the wrong parking lot."
Oh no.
They burn all these cars in the wrong parking lot. And so the tankers were like, "Well, hey, we got this," right? It was another one of my tank platoons. So they just start, and there's another video on YouTube of this. They're just
disabling vehicles.
just running over cars left and right. We destroyed every car out there.
I wonder though if those cars had munitions in them that went boom running over them.
No, they searched all of them. We ended up. I've pictures somewhere where they pulled out because they went in there and searched those cars before we did that, right?
Roger.
They pulled out all kinds of stuff. Bunch of I just distinctly remember Iranian military rifles, right? Old like G3 replica stuff. But here's another divine intervention moment. We're getting ready to pull off site, right? There were 3 dudes in the car that the Apache lit up, like just wasted 2 of them. The one guy who was up under the dash where you wouldn't think you would find a human, he had like big froed hair. He had burn marks through his hair, right?
Rounds.
Not a scratch on his body, right? And his buddies were just obliterated. Anyways, we're going to take him to the DHA at that point, and we start pulling off site, right? Get a flank shot from an RPG on a Bradley. It just barely misses it. We action up. I go back hot on my weapons, kind of a quick little action, right? And then we get back on the road, right? And at this point, the infantry platoon's leading. My little ad hoc headquarters platoon is behind them. I'm leading my 2 Bradleys, and I'm looking in the back of this Bradley fighting vehicle, right? And I look over, I'm like, okay, my weapons are still hot, right? Like I just came off this action. Excuse me. So I'm like, let me put them back safe. But before I do it, I'm like, I need to reverse it, right? Just because it was facing forward, it was facing the Bradley. I didn't like it. So I traverse my 50 cal over and I go to flip it on electric safe. I flip it on electric safe. It just starts running. I'm like, what the heck? And I flip it back onto fire and it stops. And everybody's like, what's that? And I'm like, I just had a weapons malfunction. Like this thing, something's wrong with it. So I reach up and I put it on mechanical safe. And I look out my window and all those rounds had gone into this Iraqi house on the side of the highway. Like I could see, it was like in a movie, right? It blew out all the glass. There was a TV in there that had like static, in it and a hole in it. And there was like X of like phosphorus burning on the wall. There was a car in a carport that was now on fire. And I'm like, oh my effing goodness. Like I felt terrible about that. And everybody thought I had everybody thought it was me, right? That I had some weapons malfunction. I'm like mortified. I'm like, no, no, I didn't,
Yeah.
And so nothing ever really came of it until we took it, like they were doing our maintenance day later that week. And my gunner was like, hey, no kidding. Every time you flipped it to fire, it would drop the solenoid on the 50. I'm like, no, that's a pretty deadly malfunction right there. But another example.
Good thing you traversed.
I'm like, I don't know why. I felt like traversing before I threw it on safe. And thank God I did. Because, that thing would have dumped about 10 rounds right to the back of that Bradley full of infantrymen. And I wouldn't want that on my soul.
No, man, that'd been horrible. Might have been horrible.
War's weird, man.
Yeah, war is weird. So that's your first, sizable engagement outside of smaller skirmishes, like you said. Then you're going to take a R&R. You're going home. You're home. You marry your wife, and you come back. Now, how long were you home?
R&R was like 14, 15 days, something like that. I think it was probably like 25 by the time you get over being stuck in Kuwait.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I spent like 3 or 4 days on each end, just laying in some rack waiting on a flight.
Yeah, no, that's right.
14, 15 days that they give you in country once you land.
Okay, so in that 14 or 15 days, did fights like that continue happening?
We did. It was really weird. It was starting to escalate, and you may or may not remember this. I remember it, but there was early 07, there was a chlorine bomb that went off on an American patrol. and that was one of our platoons. And I remember I was
Oh,
in Germany. I was in my wife's apartment in Bayreuth, Germany, watching CNN World because it was the only English speaking news station. And they were talking about a chlorine bomb going off on units. And I wrote, like, I was texting my buddy or emailing my buddy back on the line. And he's like, yeah, that was third platoon, all this stuff. And it was some kind of makeshift bomb. It didn't really do anything but make their eyes burn a little bit. But yeah, so things were picking up, right? And so I'm sitting over there, like, we were already starting to take some casualties. My particular company was very blessed. We had a very high wounded rate, but because we were in armor, we mostly survived. Our infantrymen that were attached to us took some casualties under our flag, right, under our guidon, and that was pretty rough. And they were really good friends of mine as well. But for the most part, we were kind of blessed in that point. But my parent battalion and as well as the infantry battalions around us were already starting to take some casualties, and some friends of mine had already been from the unit had already been killed. Ross McGinnis had already done his action that led him up to getting the Medal of Honor. So
yeah.
by the time I got back to the unit, we had shut down, because all of that shutting down OP San Juan and opening up Fob Falcon, or Cop Norris, excuse me, had happened while I was in R&R. And so what we did is when we opened our combat outpost, we went up and took over a barracks building in an Iraqi National Police compound in the city. And we put our company in there, our mechanized in there, and worked out of that for a while. And so when I got back, I fell in on that, and I was the XO, right? So I had to pick up continuing the logistics of, continuing fortifying that area there, and then running patrols out of it. But also around that time, shortly afterwards, right, like the surge hit. And so here's another part, right? Like, we thought we were delayed indefinitely in June, right? So we didn't even know we were going to deploy. So when they did deploy us, they're like, you're on your original order. So we're like, man, we're only going to have like an 8-month long deployment. And then at some point they're like, no, you're extended. It's got to be at least a year. You're like, okay, we're extended again, right? And so we're coming up on that year mark, right? We're getting ready. They're like, hey, we're testing all of our containers for seaworthiness, right? It was, we're pulling everything out. I've never seen a group of soldiers so happy. Connexes and containers. They're like, we're getting ready to go home, right? And at the exact same moment in time, like, Rumsfeld gets on and announces the surge and 15-month-long deployments, right? And so the inspector that was supposed to come inspect our containers, like, never showed up. And we're all standing around, everybody's like smoking and joking, and like the guy manning the radio and the CP comes out. He's like, hey guys, we're extended again, 15 months this time.
Morale crashed.
Likewise, I had never seen a sadder group of soldiers put stuff back in the container. It was so defeating, right? And that's about the time they put 4th Brigade, 1st Infantry Division that they had recently stood up. They brought them in and took over our area, and then we fell up TACOM to them at that point. And that's when we grew from a battalion size AO to a brigade size AO in the same footprint. And that's when really the spring offensive of 07 kicked off, right? Because the enemy started pushing back a lot as well. And I remember it was like Apocalypse Now, right? There's that scene where he's like in the trenches and there's just flares going off everywhere and people are just kind of doing their own thing. I remember walking to the DFAC one night and just miles and miles of trucks bringing equipment in or just coming in, right? And flares are over the city, dust is everywhere, mortars and Katyushas are coming in trying to disrupt us, and it was just like, whatever, man, I'm just gonna walk to the DFAC.
Just trying to go.
Really weird, eerie memory.
It is, dude. When I think back about some of that stuff too, it's like you're normal for there, so you don't register it as that. You just register as my normal. I'm hungry. I need to go get something. I need gear, whatever it is. I'm just gonna go do it. Yeah, man, that's wild. And so the offensive, when we get into that a little bit, how does that change your operational tempo, like your op tempo and your environment? Does that change much?
It does. It absolutely does. We still stayed on the rotations, but now instead of working out of a big fob, we now had a combat outpost. So a platoon had to stay on cycle there to actually man that and run patrols. And then, like I said, a brigade came in, they gave us even more firepower. So we ended up getting a light infantry platoon from those guys who they gave them trucks, and they were motorized infantry at that point. So we had a tank platoon, a mech infantry platoon that had Bradleys, a mortar platoon that was motor infantry, and then a light infantry platoon that was motor infantry, plus our headquarters platoon, which was also doing supplemental patrols as well. So that was about our combat power at its height during that.
That's pretty stacked up at that level.
It was pretty good. Yeah, we had some, we had some combat power between the tanks and the Bradleys. And I tell you what, during that time too, when we first got into country, it was very taboo to fire your main gun, right? I mean, they're just
Really?
Main gun of a tank really is designed to kill tanks. The mission of a tank is to fight tanks, right? And so we were really kind of learning how to use it in more of an infantry support role in an urban environment. And around that same time that the surge hit, they also gave us the canister rounds for the first time, which are big, like shotgun shells, 120 millimeter shotgun shells for the main gun round. But what it did is it gave us the ability to really engage troop targets at that point without something so big, like a heat round that would just go through buildings and houses, right? So it became a little less taboo to fire the main gun. And at one point we actually got, I don't want to say weapons free on it, but we got some pretty loose guidance on how we could employ the can rounds in firefights. And so,
what's the range on those rounds?
Oh, don't quote me. And there's going to be a bunch of master gunners that like heads explode when I say this, but I want to say it's like 100 meters.
Like how long?
So, like it's pretty short range. And again, don't quote me on it, but I want to say it's like 1,800-ish ball bearings, So I've probably got a book over here that has it.
Yeah, but what range again?
Don't spam mail me, please.
What range again, though? How far can you hit somebody?
I want to say about 500 meters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's dope. Just a big shotgun. It's a big shotgun.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. I've never seen that one. Did you ever fire any main take-up rounds?
Me personally in Iraq, no, I didn't, but my unit did. Absolutely. Yeah. So the first time we fired one, my commander was on R&R. It was shortly after we had gotten back. I had gotten acclimated. The new brigade came in. We became TACOM to them, and my commander goes on R&R, right? Well, while he's gone, the new brigade commander is out doing his little battlefield tour and is coming to our combat outpost, and I have to greet him and show him all the great and wonderful things we're doing for the United States. And so as he's coming, right, like we're in contact because this is the point where like we're starting to get in contact every single day now, right? Like almost all of our patrols are coming into some form of contact. Well, this patrol in particular gets in this pretty big run and gun battle down on the south end of our area, which was more of a Sunni dominated area. We're fighting a whole bunch of Al-Qaeda fighters down there. And anyways, one of the platoon or one of the tank commanders, a sergeant or an NCO, I think it was a staff sergeant at the time, but he let one of the can rounds fly without getting any kind of permission, right? And here I am, the XO who's in command of the company because my commander's on R&R, and the brigade commander is coming, who I've never met, and now I have to explain why an NCO fired a main gun round without permission. And it was just like, what am I going to do? Well, anyways, the patrol comes in right before the commander comes, right? And they get out and they've got all this equipment and they lay it out in front of the COP entrance, right? Like it was like bandoleras, that had holes and just bloody, uniforms that were all bloody, an AK that was just bent in half and everything, like all this stuff just laid out with blood and holes all in it. They're like, hey, look what we did. I'm flipping out. I'm like, are you serious? Like the brigade commander's coming. Like you're going to get me fired. I'm like, anyways, the guy shows up. The brigade
commander loved it, right?
Absolutely loved it.
I can't remember his name to save my life. And I'm like nervous, and he gets out and I salute, I welcome him. I walk him up to the door where all this bloody mangled equipment's laying. And he's like, what's this? And I'm like, sir, this is enemy equipment. We just got in a firefight down here. We actually just fired the main gun, the new can round, So I sold it like a salesman,
Yeah.
And this is the battle damage of it. You can see all the holes from the ball bearings. And I'm just waiting for him to nuke me and stuff. Looks at it. Cool. And walks in and never
good shit.
I was like, oh my God, thank goodness.
Yeah, dude, that's good though. That's good shit right there. This is what your combat prowess has yielded, fine gentlemen. Would you like some coffee? It's cold.
That's all your pitch, right? It's your sales pitch. Like, yeah, we fired the main gun, but look how cool and bloody it is.
Yeah. Look how good it did. That's dope. How many people were they engaging? Just one or a handful of them down there?
No, it was several. In that particular firefight, it was, if I remember, I think he fired it at a group of somewhere between 4 to 6, if I remember correctly, that was running across a road when he happened to be covering it with the gun.
Bold move, Cotton.
8, yes.
Bold move.
Ball bearings coming at you.
Yeah, dude, that's like what? That's like a claymore that goes way further. And concentrated. Yeah, dude, not cool for them. Got a good spread, yeah. Okay, so take me through. Did you ever have gunfights where you were like, I don't know how this is gonna pan out? Like, did you ever have anything like that? I mean, I know you have a tank, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I felt like we had the pretty good upper hand in most of the ones I was in, right? You know, and again, I was the XO, right? So I wasn't out there running and gunning every single day, right? I mean, I was on patrols. I definitely got in some fights. I definitely led some patrols that got in some fights and all. But, you know, like the real credit would go to the NCOs and even the platoon leaders that were out there doing the daily patrols.
Getting the grind on.
About most of the fights that we were in. You know, I think our biggest threat at the time were IEDs, right? Like that was the biggest threat. And for us, it was the EFP. And the tank even had a great survivability on it. We got hit by a lot of EFPs. We got hit by a lot of IEDs in the tanks. You know, I coded out 4 tanks to main battle damage. Did I say that right? Yeah, to battle damage. We had, you know, if I was spitballing, probably about 50% wounded in action in the company, but our survivability rate was very high because the armor provided us so much protection.
Yeah.
And so we were actually pretty fortunate at that time and space to have that, you know, where our infantry brothers weren't. The ones in the Bradley fared fairly well, but the guys in the gun trucks were dying truck crews at a time around.
You're talking about because of IEDs? Yeah.
IEDs.
Yeah.
Either deep buried or EFPs. And so with our area of operations, we had almost a no man's land right down the middle of our area, where our combat outpost was in a predominantly Shia area, which was loaded down with the Jaish al-Mahdi militia. And the south side of our AO was all Sunni, which was loaded down with Al-Qaeda fighters. Now, they were fighting each other and they were fighting us. So it was like it was a pretty good little 3-way fight there for a while. Matter of fact, our first couple of months in country, most of what we did was just police up dead bodies from where they were killing each other. We found some really nasty stuff. We had some canal systems on the outside of town, which I can talk a little bit more about, some incidents that were on CNN. You know, we would find a lot of bodies out there. Like, they would go in, the Jaish al-Mahdi or the Al-Qaeda would go in, they would get these business owners, they would tie them up and torture them. I mean, we would find them where they would take drills and just drill holes in their legs and their arms and just finally finish them off by drilling through their heads or shooting them in the back of the head. You know, we were just policing up a lot of bodies from sectarian violence for the first part of our deployment.
Yeah, and I mean, anybody can say what they want, but that kind of carnage takes a toll on just about everybody that comes in contact with it. And it's not so much like you don't have to do the killing. If you come up on scenes like that, they will stay with you. They will do something to you. You're maybe sometimes, you know, for the first time seeing the effects of what one man will and can do to another man. And a lot of times that can be shocking, yeah. And how did you handle your junior Marines in situations like that? Because if you're running around with a bunch of 18-year-old kids and 19-year-old kids and men, I'm not saying kids, but these guys are young and guys that see that for the first time, that can do something. How did you keep that in check?
You know, for me personally, I didn't have a lot of that, right? Just being the XO, right? Because the guys that were out there on patrols, I mean, they had their tank commanders, section sergeants, squad leader, what you guys would call them, but section sergeants, or platoon leader that kind of dealt with that a little bit more and more. And so I was kind of in a weird spot as the XO. And you've seen it, like the XO just kind of floats around, right? Like nobody
Yeah.
really reports to him, but he's got a little bit of power, a lot of maneuverability. You know, it's really kind of a dangerous place to be, right? Like it's kind of
Yeah.
fun, but so I didn't, I had guys in my company that I never had to deal with specifically what you're asking, right? But I do
And that's
know,
great. That's great.
yeah, I did have guys that were even seasoned guys, right? Like sergeants and sergeants first class or staff sergeants, who were in my headquarters platoon that worked for me that, we took some casualties and they took it pretty hard because they were their friends, and I remember having to comfort them a little bit, because they would just kind of break down. I remember watching a guy one time, we got word that our parent battalion in Ramadi had taken some casualties, and it was a really good friend of my gunner. And we came in off a patrol. We were just happy, high five, and we got that news, and he just hit his knees, and just what do you do, man? I got down there with him, just sat next to him, man, and just let him know I was there for him. I mean, I didn't really know what else to do. I mean, he's got to process that, but I just wanted him to know that he wasn't alone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do it a couple times in 10 in my deployment. It was one time it was my point man. I think quite certainly that was I know it was his first combat action, but it's probably the first dead body scene, and like he was the one that picked this kid up from SIF just a few weeks before he deployed. He was a combat fill out of SOI, and it just you walk up on that and he got riddled. He got hit with some 7.62 machine gun, Soviet block style, and he was just kind of laid out. He didn't look bad, but he was gone. He had expired by the time my squad got on site to try to help, and that's difficult, especially if it's your friend, especially if you know them, and then you gotta, as a leader, you gotta grab a hold of them and say, hey, you can't engage with blurry eyes, bro. Like you need to get out of that, and we could think about that later and have our emotions about it. And those are difficult conversations to try to have with somebody. Like you said, what do you say? If it's during the action, during the fight, you say whatever you need to say to manipulate their emotions to get them to get back on the gun. And a lot of people don't like when I use the word manipulate in leadership situations, but it is not all cherries and sunshine. Sometimes you're getting somebody to do in a situation what they do not want to do. And so a lot of people say use the word inspire, and it's like, yeah, but still sometimes there's no inspiring happening. Sometimes that you grab the hell a hold of somebody and say, this is where we're at, dude, and if you want to get the hell out of here, you need to pop right now. And that's manipulating somebody's emotions. That's not so much inspiring. And it does inspire change, but those are difficult situations. Those are not it's not easy. I don't think it's supposed to be easy, right? I've said that on here before. Like, if all this was just easy, there wouldn't be a point in protecting it. I don't think anymore. I think we'd all just lost if we can do that. So so let's get into transition a bit, and we don't have to beat the dead horse there. Is there anything else that you want? Actually, no, I do have more questions. The canal incident that happened with the CNN. Let's get into that.
Look it up. It's Killings on the Canal. It was kind of that's the same canal system. We had one of our sister infantry platoons was accused of taking some the first sergeant and the headquarters platoon sergeant. A couple of the guys were accused of taking some prisoners back there and executing them and throwing them in the canal. And it's actually was all over the news. It was First Sergeant Hatley. He actually just got out of Leavenworth for that. He never admitted to it. I think they found him guilty. They never found a body. It was really a weird
How does that go down?
thing. I don't have all the facts. Obviously, it was our sister. Hatley's a really good friend of mine. I actually talked to him on the phone here not long ago. But I don't have all the facts on it. But yeah, they had some prisoners that, from what I heard, this is all speculation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That EHA wasn't going to accept prisoners because they were full. But these were guys that they had actually caught in a firefight. They were in a firefight. They captured these guys. They had just taken a bunch of casualties, to include a sniper hit on a Bradley commander that from the same group of guys, and they were just like, "Yeah, release them. There's nothing you can do. The DHOS full," and they're like, "We're not going to release them, right?" And so the rumor is that they took them back to the canal and executed them and threw them in the canal, and then I think when NCO later on got in trouble and went to CID about it to try to cover himself, and then it turned into an investigation, and guys were convicted of it. They actually flew teams back to Baghdad during the war and went diving in this nasty sewage canal, never could find any bodies or anything, and still convicted them of it.
It's sickening. Now, at the same time, I don't want us to be barbaric. I don't want people to be animals, and I don't want murder, but like, I don't know. I don't know what to say with that. I guess next time, just put them down in the firefight and be fucking done with it. But you're not going to get intelligence that way. But if you're going to go up to the DFAC and they don't have space for them, then what?
And what do you do?
Turn them loose and fight them tomorrow?
Killed your buddy so he can go fight you tomorrow and maybe kill you. It's a weird situation. I kind of tiptoe around that topic. You know, Hatley was a good friend of mine. I consider him a good friend. Like I said, I talked to him not long ago. I believe in him. You know, I have no idea what happened that day. I wasn't there. I don't even really want to speculate. It's kind of I agree with you, though. I don't like the barbaric side. And, you know, if we're going to talk about transition, one of the big things about me is kind of how I put my guns away a little bit, you know. But, yeah, no, it's an interesting little side story there for that deployment.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's really shitty too. I know there was multiple things from Iraq that had came out, you know, in the times that we were deploying to Iraq, and one of them was there was a reporter, you know, with a videographer, and it was Fallujah. And what they don't tell in the story was that 2 days prior, one of the Marines was clearing and dead checking a body, and it was booby trapped, and boom, he got blown up. And so like 3 days later, they're in a gunfight and Marines going in and doing dead checks, but he does them with a hammered pair. And it got caught on footage, and then boom, that runs up. They're just murdering people and dead checking them with rounds and this, that, and the other thing. And everybody leaves the other stuff out of context. Like, yeah, he just got his friend murdered, and his best friend since, you know, however long, just got blown into pieces because they dead checked your proper way that you want it to happen. And this is war, people. And, you know, now we see with Hamid Karzai International Airport incident, and we see with, you know, recently with Hamas in Israel, war is mainstreamed. There's a GoPro on every helmet. There's a phone in every hand. And so all of the Americans who've been sheltered from wars off our shores and only looking at it when you want to, it's everywhere now. And maybe count your blessings that it's been off our shores for 20 something years, and appreciate the fact that we have that in hand as far as, at least as far as now is concerned. But yeah, it's scary, man. It's scary the way the world is, and has been and goes, and beautiful yet chaos, all around us. So let's talk about transition. You said you put your guns away a little bit, and if that was part of your transition, I'd like to hear about it.
So yeah, man, I tell you, getting out, you know, I met you at Laurel Ridge, right? And there was a lot going on. Is that loud?
Nope.
My neighbor decided to cut his grass right now.
Awesome.
I hear it like perfectly, so I just went.
I can't hear it at all.
So yeah, I met you at Laurel Ridge, and that was actually a really bad time in my life, right? I don't think anybody would argue that. I mean, people don't go there because they're having a great day.
That's right. Yeah.
There was a lot going on there. You asked me a question earlier about like dealing with soldiers, young guys that are seeing combat and death and stuff like that for the first time, and how do you coach, mentor, teach them through that? But let me tell you what, nobody asked the XO how they're doing. Yeah. You know, nobody asked the XO how he's doing or what's going on there, right? And so, in particularly, even with officers in the officer corps in the Army, that I can speak to, can be fairly toxic, right? And I'm sure the Marine Corps can be the same, but you know, nobody asks you how you're doing, nobody cares, you know, and it's pretty toxic. And so going back to my childhood also, this is the tie-in, right? Where, you know, I'd had a pretty traumatic childhood. My war experience was kind of bloody. You know, there was a lot of stuff that we haven't had time to cover yet, but I kind of went in company command, and went on to be a senior tactics instructor, cavalry troop commander, and everything just kind of came tumbling down on me, right? I had a bad back. In 2010, I had a back surgery, L4, L5 fusion, to kind of save my job in the Army right before. I mean, that was coming out of Iraq and before I went into command in a tank company, and it worked. Like it got me, back to where I could take command of a company and be fit to fight again. And then all of a sudden it didn't work. Like I got halfway through my second command and my back started failing again. And I got to where I couldn't walk. I was having to do PT in the morning with all these Army and Marine Corps lieutenants, because I was one of 2 troops in the Army that actually trained Marine Corps tank lieutenants back when y'all had tanks, 1812s. And my XO was a Marine Corps captain. And so, I'm out here running with these guys. They're fresh out of college, every morning. And here I am post back surgery. And, it was hurting. I would have to lay in my command post for like an hour every morning to get my back straight. And I just had a lot of stuff I wasn't processing. I compartmentalized a lot of the trauma, a lot of the war trauma, and a lot of that trauma we mentioned from childhood earlier. And it all came crashing down on me. One mistake, in my opinion, that I made was going to Fort Benning, which was an hour and a half from where my family lived. And so I was kind of caught up in a lot of family trauma at the time, or drama, if you will. And then my dad died also during that time. He died right after you and I first met. And so it was just this big coming apart on my end, right? Like it just, my whole world came crashing down. I lost my physical health. I wasn't able to keep my job in the Army. I started drinking too much, like way too much. And then all that childhood trauma that I had repressed forever started coming out. And I just wasn't in a good spot. And I remember I got up one day and I barely remember it, right? Like I was just sitting in this fog at my command post at my desk. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I got up and I went to the troop medical center, like down the road. And I said, I need help. I don't even know where to start. And they're like, what? Mental health, I guess. I don't know. Right. Mm-hmm. That's really kind of what started me going to Laurel Ridge and got me there. In the same time, my back continued to fail. And I just got to the point where I could barely walk, right? I could barely walk. Things were going bad. And one of the doctors, recommended Laurel Ridge. Like, hey, we got this great program out there. And so I went out there, and we'll talk about that in a minute and all, but man, it was a scary time because, man, I'd been a soldier since I was 20 years old, like I didn't know what else I was going to do. I thought I was going to be an Army officer until I retired. I'm an old man living near, shopping at the PX the rest of my life. But like just great, like unknown. I'm like, man, my health sucks. I can barely walk. Like I had some other health issues that were going on. I was depressed as I could be. I was dealing with all this trauma. I was drinking too much. I had no idea what I was going to do in my life. It was the scariest thing in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And I ended up going to Laurel Ridge, where I met you, and I learned a lot there. I worked on a lot of the combat trauma I had. And then I also worked a lot on that childhood trauma. And I realized that, man, my childhood was pretty shitty. It was pretty bad, right? Like there's some things that went on there that were definitely not normal that I had normalized because it was my childhood. I didn't know any better, right? And it had played this really negative role on me most of my life. And so anyways, fast forward, I got really lucky and I got retired. The Army was very good to me. The government was very good to me in that aspect. I got retired and I got picked up right away by a railroad. So I had a job. I mean, they hired me months before I even got out. And so I went straight into it, and it took a lot of that stress off because at the time too, I didn't know I was going to get meet the criteria to actually, get a pension from the Army. Right. So I'm like, what am I going to do? Right. Mm-hmm. So I got that job and I was like, okay, I can keep the lights on, right? And then the cards kind of fell in place with the Army there and the VA. And so I moved to Nashville. They moved me up to Nashville, Tennessee. And I found myself, and that was around the time my dad died. And my family who was already toxic on that side, came in there and basically stole all of mine and my sister's inheritance. They stole every dime of it. And they demonized us in the process of it, because my grandmother has dementia. She had some issues going on, and they just convinced her that we were the worst people in the world and that we were stealing everything. We didn't even live there. They were stealing everything because they actually lived there and blaming us who didn't even live there. And so my grandmother was calling me and telling me how terrible I was. And I'm like, I mean, I was losing my mind. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I've never victimized anybody in my life. I like selfless service. I'm out here serving my country. I'm like a good Christian man. I love everybody. Like, I'm falling apart. Like when I needed help the most, right? When I needed family, they're stabbing me in the back at the same time, right? And so this was all going on after I left Laurel Ridge and around the time I moved to Nashville. And it was just this very dynamic, very crazy time in my life. And at one point, I'm like, what I have to do is take everything that I once held to be true, and I have to flush it. And I have to redefine my life. And I have to redefine the environment around me. And I have to redefine my path. Because I used to think, hey, I'm going to inherit all this land and I'm going to be, the seventh generation living down on it. And I realized that's not true anymore, right? That's gone. Right. And even if I had it, do I really want that? Because that's also where a lot of my childhood abuse happened. And there's a lot of bad blood down there. And honestly, I never really wanted to live there. And that was kind of a very hard time in my life. And so I actually relapsed into drinking when I moved up to Nashville. I'd sobered up at Laurel Ridge and I realized, hey, look, man, 90% of my problems is alcohol, right? Like I drink too much, right? And I'm proud to say that now, man. I'm 4 years sober now. But I relapsed into drinking, and when I left Laurel Ridge, I had processed all this trauma, all this war trauma and everything, and I felt really good about it. And I got to Nashville, and then I have just this toxic family. My grandmother's calling me and telling me I'm a thief and how bad I am, and I'm like, I've never stolen anything in my life. She's telling me how she's moving all of my inheritance over to my uncle, and I'm like, what's going on, And then just this. I started, drinking and hanging out again. And then I realized, fast forward a few years, all that trauma that I processed at Laurel Ridge was bothering me again. Like I suddenly was sitting here thinking about all my dead Army buddies and all the like blown up people I saw in Iraq and everything. And I'm like, suddenly crying myself to sleep again at night, and I'm like, I took this job. I currently travel about 80% with the job I'm at. So I spend like Monday through Friday in hotels, and I was getting these hotels that had bars in them. I was sitting at the bar at night, drinking, talking to all the other businessmen. And then I'd go up to my room and I'd just bawl my eyes out, all this trauma in my head and everything. And I'm like, man, what's going on here? I thought I processed all this stuff, And so, that was about the time where I'm like, man, I've got to change my path, right? Like I've got to make some changes here, And that was when I stopped drinking again, like 4 years ago. And all that trauma went away again. It was kind of funny how that happened. But man, I feel like I veered like a little ADD monkey off topic a little bit there.
No,
but
it's okay. It's no problem at all. I talk down on alcohol a lot. I wasted a lot of years after I came home on alcohol, and probably, arguably, a couple of years there before, just being wide open, young in the Marine Corps. That's what we do. But alcohol's killing the warfighting community right now. 22 years of warfighting community coming home, and we far surpass combat deaths with alcohol deaths back at home. And like, I just want people to know, like I try to tell the competitive side of people, like, when you kill yourself, whether it's with alcohol, with a gun, with whatever, when you're gone, you did exactly what they wanted you to do 15 years ago. It just took a little longer. And they're going to celebrate the fact that one more of you's gone because of what they did to you or because what you were unable to do for yourself. And it's tough, but that's the tough love. It's like, be competitive. You're just turning into to an enemy enemy confirmed kill 15 years post fact. Maybe you did with alcohol, maybe you fucked yourself up with alcohol and lost your mind. But alcohol is absolutely not good. It's not good for PTSD. It's a depressant. It brings out bad memories. Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. And
And I'm sure you're the same, man. I mean, just being a Marine and a leader, and me being an Army and a leader, like we've had guys in front of us, and statistically, X number of them are going to die because of something related with alcohol. And I'm seeing it, and I'm sure you're seeing it. We just buried a friend of mine, I guess last year or so, drank himself to death, just pickled himself. Like, just you talk about a terrible, painful, agonizing death. I mean, that is the bad way to go. I mean,
yeah,
skin,
man.
eyes, low, just screaming in pain, waiting for it to end. But I mean, just couldn't get his lips off the bottle. And I mean, I've seen it happen over and over and over again with guys. And you're right, the military culture. I know the Marine Corps has got to be the same as the Army. You know, we build it around drinking. Like, hey, let's, the Marine Corps, they pride themselves on being formed in a pub,
Yeah,
right? Like, or a
yeah,
the Army's the same. We have grogs everywhere. We just mix all the nasty liquor
yep,
together and see get the drunkest. And it's like, it always ends badly. It always ends badly. It
yeah,
always ends with people puking on themselves or fighting or wives mad or, people crying. And then that's one of the biggest things I saw in the military is like, one, we're all alpha males. We're all afraid to ask for help. I remember
hmm,
being a tank commander with third ID, and I was hurting even then, although I was just way too busy to hurt. And I remember looking around at my NCOs, my sergeant's first class, with these combat vests, 3, 4 deployments under their belts. And, I like, they're mad and they're having problems with their wives and everything else. And I remember thinking, I mean, like, how are they dealing with their trauma? And I remember thinking they can't be. They got to be just like me, holding it in and just suffering through it, and that belief has never changed. I mean, fast forward 10 years, I still think that's true. They're holding it in, or, maybe they've seeked help by now, but it's a very toxic culture, right? And their answer to that is, hey, drink liquor.
yeah,
Go, hey, no big deal. Just get a bottle of Jack on your way home. Go hang out with your neighbors, have a bonfire, get shit-faced drunk, and go do PT in the morning. Okay, well, that's not helping anything. You're like you said, it's a depressant, I mean,
yeah,
and
man.
so I did that for years, right? And it's and like I hate on alcohol. Like between you and I hate on alcohol. But my stance, I live in Nashville and it's a party town, and I go downtown a lot. I shoot nightlife photography, and that's all they do is drink down there, right? Well, you don't make friends when you tell people you don't drink,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so
yeah,
like I don't run around bragging about it to people. And so I tell people like, oh, I love alcohol, and I do. I loved alcohol for many years. It was a staple of my adult life for
yeah,
many years. That's what I tell myself, right? Just when I tell other people to get them off my back. I'm just like, I chose not to drink it. And that's really true. Like I really chose not to, but I have to balance that kind of well, right? Because like I said, you don't make friends when you tell people you don't drink. People look at you like you got like AIDS or something, and it's just like,
isn't that funny? Isn't that weird to you?
it's so weird, right? It's like, hey, I chose not to drink. Like, look, you're over here, you blew $100 and you feel like doo-doo tomorrow, right?
Mm,
Like,
yeah,
what's so fun about that?
yeah, and I
Like I
did the
said, I
same
go
thing.
downtown, I shoot photography all the time here in Nashville, which is a fun town. And, you'll see all these girls are dressed to the T. They're beautiful. They're out there. I love taking pictures of them. About 10, 11 o'clock, when people start getting really turned, you see those same girls, right? They're on their hands and knees in the middle of that dirty street, throwing up all over themselves, sitting in the corners where I see the bums pee. And I'm like, girl, you're so beautiful, and you sit here and you poison yourself with this alcohol, and now you're sitting in bum pee,
Yeah,
throwing up on yourself, acting like a fool. Like, is
yeah,
that really
man.
fun?
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, it seemed fun. When I was young, we're gonna get all,
Yeah.
like let's get fucked up and, find some women, and if we can't find the women, we'll get fucked up and we'll go get in a fight. Like that. That's horrible. Like now I'm
Terrible.
older, I'm like, what? Why? Like I just don't. I don't understand. And some of that, we need some of that edge. We need some of those, some of those alpha males, out there holding the line. But with alcohol, man, like you can hold the line without it. And you'll be more lethal and more dangerous because of it, I think, as a Marine, as a soldier. And you put the amount of time into studying your enemy and your terrain, and the amount of time I put into partying and going out and drinking and making that a priority, you'll be way better than we were. Um,
Expand upon that just for a quick second. Like one, I had my own falling apart, right? Like I had to deal with some trauma. I had to really deal with my family, and I'm still dealing with that. It still hurts to have all your inheritance stolen and to be demonized for something you didn't do and just betrayed by your family for money, right? And that kind of hurts. And so I had to take some time over the past several years to really rebuild myself and fortify my position on earth and where I'm at and to find my path, right? And I kind of stepped out of the spotlight for a little bit, for a
Mm-hmm.
few years back. And, I don't talk about a lot of veteran stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've hired a lot of veterans. Some of the guys I served with in Iraq actually work for me now. I've hired them, but that's about as most as I've done. And I think lately, as I rebuild myself, as a phoenix rises from the ashes, if you will, like I'm like, what message do I want to take to veterans, right? Because that is a huge, important community for me. I'm a combat veteran. I was a leader of combat veterans. I was a leader in the Army, and like, how do I carry that on and still be proud of that and still be of service? And I think that's my message, and as I've sat back over the past few months or year or so and thought about what I can do, and I think it's really that. It's just talk about being healthy, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
being healthy. I've started going to more, VFW events and veteran events, and particularly Veterans Days parades and stuff around here, and getting a lot of attention, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm like, well, how do I expand upon that? How do I be more than just the guy standing in my cavalry Stetson on the side of the road waving at the floats as they go by, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's getting out there talking to veterans and saying, hey, look, it's okay to have trauma. Look, it's okay to see dead people. You're a soldier. That's what we do, man.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But you can't sit there and poison your mind. You can't like flush it out of your mind. You got to deal with it.
Yep.
Deal with it. Every veteran since the man has first thrown a stone has dealt with it, right? You got to process it. You can't run from it, and you
No,
got to
it'll
live
catch
out.
you. It'll catch you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, I think, and that is a beautiful message. I mean, it's same kind of premise as I want to come with this podcast. I want to show you a bunch of people who did make it out of all of that. Maybe arguably more than a lot of my guests, more than what most people experience. Period in combat. And that's the ones I want to show, because I want to say if he did more than you, that should give you hope to say if he did all that and he's okay and he's up and he's thriving. Yeah, does he have bad days? He's going to have bad days. Every guest I had on my show would openly admit that they've had bad days and still to this day can have bad days. I mean, yesterday I was having, a moment. I got my crew in here and I'm sitting on my couch, falling apart for a minute because, something that I recorded with another person, was cathartic and not in a bad way, but like in a happy way, in a good way. Feel like we're helping each other. We feel like we're helping people. And you do a whole career where you're hurting people and taking life, and it's almost like inside you to want to help. I guess, or at least inside of me, to want to help people as much as I hurt people in the past. So I get that. I can relate to that. That's my message as well. Like, we can do this, but we got to do it together. It's not alone with a bottle somewhere where the work is done. So yeah, I love
Well, I love
that.
your podcast. I love that it's been veteran oriented. I love that it's leadership oriented. I think you do a really neat job with that, man.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming on here and getting a little vulnerable and talking about this stuff, because the more of us that are coming out that did hit hard and did have experiences and did, as you say, see the bodies and deal with the bodies and even put some of those bodies there, the more of us that we can show, hey, there's a vulnerable side. You can get back in touch with your emotions. I think, for me, a lot of it was spiritual, and I don't even want to say religious, but I want to say spiritual. You meet yourself over there, and not everybody likes what they see. Not everybody comes home and is proud of the things that they did, and that's okay. And you got to take that time to sit back and reevaluate yourself and evaluate your life and where you're at, and then you need to decide where you want to be. Like, who do you want to become? Where do you want to be? How do you want people to remember you? And one thing I know for certain is that anybody you ever cared about, they don't want to remember you pickling yourself in a chair by yourself crying. They don't want you to go get blackout drunk 3 days a week, and then at the end of it, have all of your inhibitions and your senses dulled, and you kill yourself because that's happening. That's not what your friends wanted. That's not what the guys that gave, your brothers that gave the full measure for you to come back. They want you to be happy, man. They want you to have a family. They want you to raise a family, coach sports, have a positive impact on your community. If they could be up there seeing that, that's what they want. That's them standing there clapping, So
Oh, man, we had another one kill himself a couple months ago. Just offed himself.
Continues.
He did all his social media and killed himself. And it's like, why, brother? Like talk to somebody.
Well, yeah, and I think if we had the answer to why and we had the intervention answer, maybe it wouldn't be happening still, but we don't. Everybody wants to talk about suicide and how much you can prevent it by watching people's patterns of life and when they give things away or when they take things and when they change. And it's like, you know what? Like at the end of the day, if a grown-ass human being wants to be done, there's not anything you're going to be able to do to stop them, in my opinion. The things that stop them, the way you stop them is before it happens. You talk to them, you get in their head, you let them know that it's okay. You get them professional help if it's that far along. And awareness like you're doing, getting out there talking to them, like the shows, these podcasts, these people, these speakers. That's what changes it. That's what restores faith that they can get back to a righteous spot prior to them making that decision. I think once that decision's made, it's made.
And I think these veteran communities are critical for that, and kind of talking about how I stepped out of not really talking to about military at all the past several years. And you and I were talking about, it's hard to talk about sometimes. I remember being a kid and my granddad and all his brothers were World War II vets, and they would never talk about it. My stepdad, Vietnam vet, would never talk about it. And I could never understand why nobody would ever talk about it, right? Until I got back from Iraq. And I was like, well, I'm going to talk about it. And I would talk about it to like my old frat brothers or college friends or high school friends. And I always ended up upset because they couldn't understand what I was saying, right? I was sitting there conveying this significantly emotional, stories and events, that life-altering, this coming-of-age kind of stuff. And they were just like, oh, cool, bro.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
What do you mean cool? I just told you, like, I almost stepped on somebody's eyeball. What's cool about that, And I would be upset, and then... Yeah. And I think that was kind of I get it now. I get why our granddads and our dads never talked about it, right? Because you don't want, like, it's painful. But on the flip side, that was when my granddad had already passed. That was when my stepdad started talking to me about Vietnam, right? When I got back from Iraq. Yep. And I could talk to him about Iraq. And it never bothered me. The same as I'm talking to you about it, and it doesn't bother me, right? Because I know that you've lived that life. I know that you understand kind of where I'm coming from. Like we've tread the same ground, right? And I'm okay with that, right? Now, if you were, somebody else and I was telling this story, I'd probably walk away and be like, oh man, I don't like opening myself up to people like that,
Yeah.
But veterans, yeah, whatever, man. We did the same stuff. I can laugh about it all day long. And it's kind of weird, that phenomenon like that, where veterans can talk to each other and be okay, but I can't talk to anybody else about it. And that's why stuff like your podcast, the VFW and these veteran organizations, I think that's why they're really important, is because it gives us some place to uncompartmentalize those emotions and that information and those experiences and talk to people and reflect and bounce, stories off one another and, hey, make sure, am I okay?
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I love the VFW. I'm a senior vice commander at my post, and we're right out the back gate of Camp Lejeune, and we have a lot of younger GWAT era veterans starting to come. Put a pistol range out there, and we try to show them, like, I know a lot of people have to put their guns down and kind of get past that, and I had to put them down while I was on medication when I was first trying to figure myself out, because I didn't want to have a mistake, right? But since then, I love shooting still. I always love shooting. I go to the range now, and a lot of people say, oh, you got PTSD. How can you go shoot? Like, fuck off. Like, going and shooting a paper target doesn't trigger me. Yeah, exactly. Are you... Like, this is my life. This wasn't my job. This wasn't a 9-to-5 thing. This was my life. This is part of my life, and that's how I can do it. And do I still have bad days? Sure, but shooting helps me. It's like you sitting down and riffing on a guitar and going out there and getting that aggression out, and it's therapeutic to a lot of people. And I don't know where I was going with that, but
well, I might have misspoke to you. When I say put my guns down, I don't mean that I don't shoot. I definitely love shooting, but I think is more as
mindset wise,
right? Younger me was more,
Yeah, because like you have more guns than anybody, like in the country, right?
I've got a few.
Yeah, you got the whole
I lost them
armory. Oh yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Okay.
I took them all out on Percy Breeze to show a guy, and the boat sank.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Right. Correct. Yeah. As far as anybody else is concerned.
No, no,
Anyway.
I still love it. I think now I seek instead of seeking combat, I seek beauty in the world. I
Yeah.
try to. I think in the biggest way I can express that is I don't really hunt anymore. I'm an avid hunter. I grew up on land. I hunt. I've killed hundreds and hundreds of deer,
Deers.
and I'm just at a point now where I'm just like, man, I don't want to hurt an animal. I would much rather take a picture of it than shoot it with a rifle.
Yeah.
My son wants to go hunt, and I'll take him hunting.
No,
he
I
needs to
get that
learn.
sentiment, man. When I came home, it's the same way. Now, I still will hunt deer if I need deer meat. I still will go hunt elk if I need elk meat. I will hunt bear. But do I do needless? Like, I don't need anything. I'm just going to go see how many I can kill, or I'm going to keep every single fish that I catch, regardless if I think I'm going to eat it. Nope, I don't do that anymore. And I do feel that. So I think once you've killed, I hate to say that, but once you've killed a man, once you've been in the ultimate arena and you've done that, you're not proving anything to anybody anymore. I got more deer than you. Okay. You killed more deer. You got a bigger deer. Okay. That's what it's like to me. That's how I liken it. But I do not want to hurt. I want to bring positivity, almost every aspect of my life. I want to help and bring positive, emotions and sensations to people. That's what I want to do. And killing a bunch of animals, and it doesn't do it. That's just okay. Now, if I can bring a bunch of people food, that's a positive thing. But outside of that, yeah, I feel the same way. It was Ernest Hemingway said, World War One messed Hemingway up a good bit. Things happened and it messed him up. But he said, there is no killing, or there is no hunting like the hunting of grown men. And those who have hunted armed men long enough and liked it never cared for anything thereafter. I think that's a lot of where some of our veterans are too. Some of our hardened guys that are hitting out there, they got so attached to that life, and it's like, what becomes of it after that? And it takes what you're doing. It takes that re-evaluation of self, and then identifying like who you want self to be, and then putting your actions to work as much as your mind is wanting to be that person. Conducting that action plan, creating that action plan to get from step A to maybe it's step 5,000 to get to where you want to be, and it's 1% better every day and making it work. Yeah. What else you got?
One thing the military doesn't really do, and that's one thing the veteran community can really do for the veteran. The military makes you think that once you're out of the military, you're dead and gone, right? Like there's nothing else. They train you that America, the public, corporate America is a very scary place. Like, because they want retention. They want you to stay in there. And you get these guys that get out of the Army. I remember when I got out of the Army, I was 35 years old. I felt like an old man, right? Like I felt like an old man. Like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I guess just sit around and get old, go shop at the PX, wear my veteran hat, and I'm like, but I felt that way. And I've got buddies that are still in. A good buddy of mine, he's a brigade commander right now. We were company commanders at 3rd ID together, and I meet up with him. He's from around here, so about every year he'll come into town. And I was talking to him the other night, and he's talking like an old man, like he's 60 or something, He's so curious about what I do, He's so just mysterious, this corporate America life. And I listen to his stories, and because I'm at the point now in the military where I glorify all of it. It was all just great, I forget all the like toxicity and the cold nights on concrete floors, and he's reminding me of man, I'm getting like PTSD from like command and staff meetings right now. But yeah, and he's the same way. He just acts like an old man. Like, what are you gonna do? Like when he gets out, I'm like, bro, like, dude, you're 35.
Got your whole life ahead of you.
Now, like you've got your whole life ahead of you, man. Like you can do so many things, right? Like, but I think a lot of veterans are like that. They get out, especially guys that retire. They get their little VFW hat, and they be for like
settle.
I do. I'm a regional manager now for a big sales organization. I do a lot of customer engagements, and I'll go in these people's houses and talk to them, that were veterans, 20 years ago, they got out and haven't done a thing since, like, we got a fixed income from the government, and we just have been sitting here for 20 years because we're old, and, that's their whole life was their military service. And I'm like, well, that's a big, important thing in your life. But like, you could have done so much more the last 20 years too, right? Like,
Yeah. My platoon commander from Marja, he would say something to the order of, if after it's all done, you come to my graveyard and you look at my headstone or my tombstone, and it has all my accomplishments, and the only thing that you read on that is that I was a United States Marine for 30 years, let's call it. That's a sad thing. It's a sad thing, because you got your 18 to 20 years of your retirement, and then you had 40 something years that you could have impacted the world around you and been something, whatever you want to be, travel, make impacts, and you didn't do it. And so you got to 35 and your best years were behind you. That's sad. Yeah. That's sad to me. And I had that mindset before. Like, I get out and like, what do I do now? And I don't even know. And you got to get that out. That's the wrong mindset. It's like, look how young I got to get out and separate, and look at all this time that I have left to make an impact on the world, to leave a footprint. And,
anything in the world you want to do, it's out there. Anything, you know. But I think that's a cultural problem in the military, right? Because they really, in my opinion, right, like they preach that up, like there is nothing out there. It's scary, you know. Stay here.
Retention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at least not the Marine Corps ain't having that problem. You know what I mean? Just thought I'd throw that dig in there. Army and
Army does. Army's
Navy, like, Coast Guard, Air Force, Space Force. Well, everybody else has that problem. The Marines are like, you want incentive? Your incentive is being a Marine. Be a man. Join the force. You're not getting anything from us. They get kids with the same approach they almost got you.
Oh yeah, just prideful.
Yeah. Yep. What? Be a man. Yeah. What? You're not gonna go?
What do you want? Well, since you'll edit this, he was like, "You a pussy?"
Yeah.
You're a pussy out like a fucking pussy. Get in here, sign this paper. You're not a pussy.
Yep.
Like, well.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a bad approach. Probably a bad approach, but it does work on a lot of them.
It does, but it did not work on me. I think I actually laughed at him because I was just like, "Man, you are aggressive."
Like, you really thought you had this one in the bag, cuz you was counting on this for one.
He was mad. Bro, he was mad. I'll never forget.
Working overtime, away from his family. His wife hates him for the last 3 years because it's balls to the wall and recruiting, dude. He's basically a deployment. Then he takes his time to come talk to your family so he can get you to MEPS, and he might not get demoted for shitbaggery. And what'd you do? You pulled a rug right out from underneath of him.
I had the camera ready, and his buddy in his uniform was ready, and everything. It's like, no.
Yeah, wearing blues. Highly likely had to get him detailed, which cost him like $350 to get his medal set.
Yeah.
All for a pass.
All for some little stoner high school kid to bail on him.
Yeah, a little punk.
I was like, no, I'm not going to a concert.
No, I'm all good, dude. Who was it that you used to play at Laurel Ridge? It had such a weird name.
I remember one time I played "Wish You Were Here" in front of everybody.
Yeah, that was good. You played something like Stink Fist or some weird name.
Ween. I play a lot of
Ween. Yeah, you play Ween. Yeah.
I love Ween.
Yeah, that's good shit.
I still play a lot of Ween songs.
I bet you do. Yeah, that's good. Phenomenal guitarist. Yeah, that was awesome. Well, when you're not 2 years removed, maybe.
When I put my mind to it.
Yeah, man. Well, man, it's been a while. I think we could cut it here. Is there anything I missed that you wanted to talk about?
No, man. I think this was I could sit here and talk to you all day.
I know, that's the way I feel too. We'll have to link up. Man. You being in Nashville over there, man. I'm close enough. I'm still over here by Camp Lejeune, and I try to make it to. Actually, I was just in Nashville. But I was working, and my wife was in Nashville for work, so I just ran down real quick for a dinner, and I was a couple hours north of that doing some other work, and so I was just there. But I do mean to make it out there, and I'm definitely going to hit you up when I go. Some beautiful country out there, some of my favorite.
That's a blessing of living in Nashville. You know, I came here kicking and screaming because when I got out of the Army, I wanted to go to Atlanta, you know, because I thought I was going to fall in on all that inheritance. And they sent me to Nashville, and I got here, and I'm like, I am an idiot. I'm so glad that they sent me here and didn't listen to me because
cool, yeah.
I love that. One of the best parts about it is a tourist town. So everybody comes to Nashville, right? And so since I've been here, I have been able to reconnect with a lot of people I haven't seen in a while, right? Especially a lot of Army guys. I mean, probably 4 or 5 times a year, an old Army guy, old buddy, or somebody will hit me up like, "Hey, I'm in Nashville for the night, and I'll go downtown. I'll meet them. I'll give them the walking tour, because I knew a lot down there, and so link up with them." So it's been really rewarding in that aspect. I have a old Army buddy of mine who's doing really, really well for himself. I met him and one of his business partners the other night down there, and yeah, just give him walking tours. And yeah, man. So if you're in town, I'd love to link up with you.
Oh, absolutely, dude. I'll hook up the next time I'm up over that way. I'm definitely gonna reach out and talk. But yeah, man, I can't appreciate it. Tell you enough how much I appreciate you taking the time, being the vulnerability to come through and talk, because I think this message is gonna resonate with a lot of guys out there, and so I appreciate that. But Matt, you got anything for us? Matt Snow, Josh, anything else?
No, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here.
Yeah, man. All right, man. For Choices, Not Chances, guys, this is Ryan. If you've seen anything that you need to post back out there, I ask that you do. Tag the post, tag the show on whatever platform you're on, and share the information out to your friends, to your community, to your family. And we'll catch you next time. Choices, Not Chances, guys.
Well, that concludes this episode. Thanks for listening to Choices Not Chances podcast. Please share, like, and subscribe wherever you listen or watch our podcast. You can also follow us on social media at Choices Not Chances Podcast. Thanks, and have a great day.
Louisiana Gun Shop, your firearm headquarters, specializing in concealed carry guns, ammo, and training. You can get your Louisiana permit with us. Also a large selection of AR-15s, or if you are that build-it-yourself type of guy or gal, we have all the parts to build and customize your own AR-15. Glock, SIG, Taurus, Ruger. We have all the brands, both in the store or at LouisianaGunShop.com.
Not too far. You're marking the building. Hit him. Yeah, that's good. That's a good shot. That's money. Yeah.